Yep, they can hear us. Good morning, everyone. Nope, that one's good. So, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our first Certified Burn Manager Advisory Committee here at the Department of Forestry. I'm going to give some few Zoom public meeting tips and tricks so that, and then we'll get rolling and Amanda will take over the remainder of the agenda here. So again, welcome everyone. My name is Tim Olschbach. I serve as Deputy Chief of Policy and Planning with the department. This is our first meeting for a new program at the department with the Certified Burn Manager. It was passed through Senate Bill 762 in 2021 and through looking at getting some orientation and some advisement from the committee before the program launched. So this is pre-launch of the program itself. As far as for the public meeting portion of this and for participation, glad to have so many folks join today. And with that, what we would ask is there is time on the agenda for public comments. Glad to have folks listen along and learn about what this new program is. Along with that as well, if you're not a committee member, if you would please keep your camera off in the interim and on mute so that as we go through, and then when we get to that public comment portion, we'll make sure that we get some time to listen to your thoughts and comments. So for committee members as well, feel free to keep your camera on as we encourage that as so that we can conduct business. It also helps with just with participation. There is an option in Zoom as well to modify your screen to adjust for folks on camera. So it does do some sorting like that. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda for the remainder of the meeting.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks everyone for being here. We're going to go ahead and start off with a round of introductions, and I think we'll start off here in the room, and then we'll go to the Zoom world. My name's Amanda Rao. I'm the Prescribed Fire Coordinator for the Oregon Department of Forestry. Go to my right here next.
All right, hey guys, Amanda Sullivan-Aster. I'm here in the room. I represent Associated Oregon Loggers as their Forest Policy Manager, and I was on the Certified Burn Manager RAP.
All right, hi everybody. I am Stacy McCarter. I'm the Mitigation Program Manager for the Protection Division.
And then from there, maybe I'll let Tim, since he's running the Zoom screen, call people out from there.
Colby Drake.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Yeah, Colby Drake. I'm with the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde as the Natural Resources Director. Thank you.
John Punches.
Hey everybody, I'm an associate professor with Oregon State University College of Forestry. I teach about forestry and fire stuff and work in the extension world.
Katie Sauerbrey.
Yeah, good morning, folks. Katie Sauerbrey. I'm the Fire Program Director for the Nature Conservancy in Oregon. We're a nonprofit NGO that does prescribed firework across the state and country.
I'm going to interrupt here for just a second to clarify some roles really quick. So Katie is the chair of the Oregon Prescribed Fire Council, but they are representing TNC on this committee. And Colby is the vice chair of the Oregon Prescribed Fire Council. And he's actually representing the Prescribed Fire Council on this committee, even though he properly identified himself in his title. So just so that you folks understand who they're representing on the committee, despite the many hats that they wear.
Thank you for that, Amanda. Yeah, I forgot.
No problem.
Okay, next up, Mark Shea.
Good morning, Mark Shea, Medford Fire Department. I'm a Deputy Fire Marshal.
Thank you, Mark. Katie McKendrick.
Hi, everyone. Katie McKendrick. I'm an ecologist and manager of the Willamette Valley Fire Collaboration. We're a very new program as of last July, dedicated to prescribed and cultural burning. Our host organization is the nonprofit called Ego Studies Institute based out of Olympia, Washington. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Did I miss any committee members?
We might just ask, is anyone representing in place of Kenny Rose from Justina Resources?
Yeah, I am Bruce Gibo with Justina.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Bruce.
Mhm.
Share the agenda.
All right, thanks, folks, for providing introductions. And now we're just going to quickly review the agenda since we're already operating based on that. And moving forward, we're going to talk about the roles and responsibilities of the Certified Burn Manager Advisory Committee. The folks who've introduced themselves are the committee members, not including 3 federal ex officio members, of whom 1 has been referred and then 2 are still vacant. And none of those folks are on this call today. So are you going to go ahead and link to these so that we can put them? We're going to go ahead and roll into the next part of our agenda, which is talking about the roles and responsibilities of the advisory committee. And we assume that folks who are here have a sense about the program already. And so, oh, this is the charter. Oops. So we're gonna look at the rulemaking as it refers to the advisory committee, so we're all clear on what the roles and responsibilities are. Thanks for your patience as Tim and I tag team this. He's driving and I'm talking. All right. So this is under 629-042-1000, and we're looking now at the rules as written, as they're approved by the Board of Forestry. Thanks for zooming in so I can see better. So this group is really convening to provide recommendations to the forester in administering this program. It consists of 7 members. Now that's 10 members total, actually, if you include the ex officio, but the ex officio members do not vote. So it's 7 members who are selected from a robust pool of applicants. We had way more people apply to be on this committee than we were able to select, which was a good thing, but it also made it difficult to decide. And we were trying to ensure that we had representation from industry, from the Oregon Prescribed Fire Council, making sure that fire department interests were represented. And as we move forward, these positions will rotate because each member has a different term, and there's a reason for that. And that was random, by the way. There were literally numbers taken and assigned to each person and then drawn for the different terms. So some members have a 1-year term, some have a 2-year term, and some have a 3-year term. So as their terms expire, new members will be solicited and then selected. The committee is going to select a chairperson today, and that is to, as we say, coordinate the work of the committee. But they're really working with myself, Stacy, and Tim to set agendas and to ensure that everything that is happening on the committee is reflected back to us accurately. We'll meet at least twice per calendar year. That will be more often at first as this program is getting up and running. We have stuff today to do, such as getting comments and feedbacks about the burn plan templates that we've created, looking at all of the rules and everything else. So making sure we're all on the same page today and then reviewing some of the materials, including our charter, which we didn't provide in advance, but we'll walk through that here after our break. And then, of course, this group's going to advise the forester on the administration of the Certified Burn Manager program. So this is an advisory group. This group will conduct reviews of proposed certificate revocation as required pursuant to the rules if that should occur. That's not something we look forward to or hope will happen because of the way that the program is set up. But if it should, that's a big part of this group, is providing, basically conducting the review itself. The department has the responsibility to provide administrative support for this committee and all subcommittees therein. And subcommittees will form as needed in response to issues that arise or advice that is given from the committee. And as I said before, this committee consists of members broadly representative of the industries, associations, and professions involved in the planning and execution of prescribed fire. And that's all fire. To be super clear, pile burning is a form of prescribed fire. Broadcast burning is a form of prescribed fire. So is understory burning. All those forms of burning are prescribed fire. And so it's important that this committee be broad, which was hugely influential in the selection of the membership, ensuring that we got representation from all aspects. In addition to the members designated in this role, we'll have representatives from the following federal agencies. During the rulemaking process, we did go back and forth on which federal agencies should be included. You might note that the Fish and Wildlife Service is not on here. That's largely because their land does not fall much within ODF protection or ODF designated forest land. And so they were not included. We included the U.S. Forest Service for obvious reasons, representative of BLM, and then the representative of PIA. And that's really because those federal agencies have jurisdiction over land that overlaps with us. The forester shall serve as secretary for the committee. So, you know, that is me as the prescribed fire coordinator for all intents and purposes, unless I am not able to be here for some reason. And the process of applying for an appointment to the Certified Burn Manager Advisory Committee is as follows. The priority, now this first subset A does not really count yet because there aren't people who hold certified burn manager certificates yet. But when we solicit for and select folks for positions on this committee in the future, we will give priority to those who hold a certified burn manager certificate. And then second, to prescribed fire practitioners. B is any interested person may submit a completed interest form to the department to apply for an appointment, which has already occurred. An interest form must be submitted to be considered for an appointment, and the interest forms are available on the Department of Forestry's website. The interest forms are kept on file in accordance with our record retention policy, and we will acknowledge the receipt of completed interest forms. And then the state forester will appoint members to the Certified Burn Manager Advisory Committee, which those who are selected and who were not selected all received letters from the state forester informing them of their status. And then committee members may serve 2 consecutive 3-year terms, but we did, as noted before, adjust initial terms so that we have committee stability. And that's so we don't have the entire committee turnover all at one time, right? Because we want some continuity with membership. A vacancy exists when a committee member completes their term for that position, or they resign, become incapacitated, or otherwise incapable of performing the duties of a member. They have been removed from the appointment for just cause, is not reappointed, or is no longer employed in the position that the appointment represents, or is no longer affiliated with the association or organization that the appointment represents. So to be clear there, you're not selected because of who you are. It's, I mean, that's part of it, but it's about who you're representing, as per ensuring that we have broad representation from all of those entities who are involved in the planning and execution of prescribed fire. Any vacancy subject to this rule will be filled in the manner as identified above with an interest form process that will be submitted and solicited for. The committee can create subcommittees and appoint people to serve on those subcommittees. I think that's a really important thing to consider moving forward with this program regarding how it gets executed and implemented. There's the administrative side, and then there's the side of how does this all roll out and really culminate into a meaningful program. And I think there's multiple entities that will be involved in that, the Prescribed Fire Council being probably the most substantial to that end in terms of ensuring that there's a network of practitioners available to help mentor the next generation and create that successional legacy. The state forester may remove an appointed member for just cause. That's okay. I'm reading off the screen in front of me here, not on my laptop. So Tim's in charge. Okay, you can keep going.
No, that's the last rule.
Oh, it is.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So that and there's a few other references to the Certified Burn Manager Advisory Committee and the rules, but really what you're looking at there is what the committee is responsible for. I guess I'd like to just provide an opportunity for any questions from the committee members that they might have, or clarifications or feedback about all of that. It's in roll, so there's not much to change with it, but if there's anything we can clarify, I just want to make sure we provide that opportunity from either our one person in the room or Zoom land yet. We'll keep this group updated as we receive feedback from our federal partners about their selections. Daniel Dyer has been selected by the Bureau of Indian Affairs to represent them. And we will we'll hear back from, hopefully from the Forest Service and the BLM about who they want to refer to us to represent them. And again, those are non-voting members. They're ex officio. So they're selected by the agencies they come from, and they do not vote. And because if they did vote, we'd have to change the number of the committee, because it would make 10, and that doesn't work for making decisions if we come to a tie. So yeah, I think with that,
I've got a quick question.
yeah,
Amanda. Yeah, sorry, in the room here, Amanda Sullivan asked her. Can you remind me? I know that we're advisory in nature, so we're not a decision-making body, but do we advise at all on approving folks that are going through the program in addition to the revocation, or is the approving piece, you know, simply as long as they've met all the requirements and they have, you know, taken the test and got a passing score? Like, is there any work on that front side for this body?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, I guess the way I see it is if we had somebody that we were not sure about who was coming through on the historical recognition side, and we wanted some more feedback about whether or not to put them through, that would come to this group. I mean, and that's not in the rules, but that would make sense to me, because otherwise it's basically between the three of us.
Okay.
That meaning Tim, Stacy, and I, to take someone's historical recognition. And maybe we can talk, we have time, so I can talk through that a little bit, if that would help. So there's the brand new pathway for someone who doesn't have, they have some experience burning, but they don't have experience leading burns. They don't have a type 2 burn boss qualification. They haven't been leading, you know, thousands of acres of burns with DFPA and Douglas Forest Protection Association, where they do quite a bit of burning and don't have those qualifications. They're taking advantage of the existing statute that does allow that. So somebody who doesn't fall into that, they have some experience burning, they want to go through the training, open up a certification book, and move through that process. There's three things they need to do. The first thing is to take their training through an accredited training provider who has an agreement with ODF. And so we vet that. So not just anyone can go out and roll out the training program. And they use learning objectives and an assessment that we have created, which I've been working with John Punches closely on, as well as Heather Hewitt. Those are through people that have been developing basically what would be considered a skeleton of curriculum that can then be used to fill out content. The rationale behind that being folks from the AOL world are not going to want to learn the same things as folks who are doing ecological burning, for example. They need to learn different things, but they got to get the same assessment taken. They have to know the same rules, but the flavor of it should be different. So we didn't want to create just this one type of curriculum that everybody used, because we know there's such a diversity in the state of what's happening in terms of prescribed fire. The same curriculum is going to be used whether you're doing pile burning or broadcast burning. That was something we decided to keep the same, right? But the certification books will be different. So to do a pile burning certification, you do that task book. It's the equivalent of a task book, but it's a certification book, and you get a pile burn certification. And the process for that is to take the curriculum and pass the exam, and then complete a certification book. And the certification book is completed under an already certified burn manager. If you do the broadcast understory version, you automatically get a pile burn certification with that. That task book is more involved. And so the certification books. It's very hard to get out of the National Wildfire Coordinating Group language of position task books. So certification books, and we use that terminology on purpose to avoid confusion, despite that it leaks in many ways with the NWCG system. Yeah. And so once the certification book is completed, that comes back to ODF with a $50 fee. And then I produce a card to that person, and they're certified. So that's how that process works for somebody who has never had any kind of certification before. They haven't been leading burns for the last 5 years without any kind of qual, which there are people out there that we want to recognize under that historical recognition. So that's the next tier from there, working from that point up, is applying for historical recognition. And that can come in two forms. One is you're a type 2 burn boss. You submit your documentation showing that you're qualified type 2 burn boss. And then we review all of that, and that's an automatic. And we did that on purpose because we want there to be an already robust cadre of certified burn managers who've been doing this already. They've already been following the rules. They've been doing all the same stuff. So we need to honor that they've been doing that work already and just check the box. Then there's historical recognition, which without a type 2 burn boss qualification. And that's where we are going to be looking at what people submit for their documentation and potentially bringing that to this group going, what do you guys think? We're not sure about this person. It looks good, but there's this lacking, and then we can get some more perspective. And I think especially for like folks who have more knowledge of what industry burning looks like versus ecological burning versus rangeland burning for cattle grass, production.
Well, I guess the other thing I'd add on to that is, there's folks that just have wildfire experience, of which there's burning that happens in that, firing, and maybe they're FFT2, but they're not, you're not a burn boss.
Right.
So, I guess that kind of play into it as well, if they want to step into the ecological burning or the industrial burning outside of an incident, and what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean,
purpose is different.
It's
right?
very different, and the process is so different too. It's sort of like everything's in reverse, where you're putting in for your permits, you're planning your burn, you're putting your lines in before there's fire on the ground.
Yeah,
you're planning for everything in advance. And we are not necessarily considering wildfire qualifications as on their own as enough for historical recognition, but definitely encourage for prep for getting the training completed and everything else. Because we don't necessarily want to see people that have absolutely no experience with fire taking the training and all of a sudden leading burns without ever following anyone on a burn. It's this balance between trying to open up this space to allow more people in to participate while also maintaining some rigor about it and making sure we're capitalizing on the existing experience that we have out there, people who have been doing intentional burning. And that interface on wildfires that you're talking about is definitely there. But it largely amounts to burnouts, around wildfires, which it is a technique, but it's one component of running a prescribed burn. Yeah. So, yeah, I hope that helps. I know we've got another person, Katie, that wants to ask a question or maybe chime in.
Well, it's along those same lines. And you might be getting here, Amanda, or you may have covered it in the advisory, in the rulemaking, and I have since forgot. But if somebody comes forward with some historical documentation that they want considered, and the committee decides, for example, yes, they have a lot of good wildfire experience. However, we'd like to see them go through the coursework so that they have a good understanding of what's required at the state level with permitting and smoke, et cetera. Is that a potential path forward where we would say, we want to see this individual take the coursework, but they don't necessarily need to complete the what is not a task book, certification book?
That's not in the rules, but I'm open to that. I mean, I don't think we should exclude these kinds of recommendations, right? Because that's why this group exists. It's really I kind of put that to Tim about what that process would look like.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. There's a couple pathways that were built into the rules intentionally to facilitate folks who have experience, who've done this for their careers, and and one of them is the pre-certified folks can kind of have that express lane, the option of the express lane through the process. The historical recognition folks, even those that have primarily wildland fire experience, the first step for them going through that path is to take the exam. And that's kind of sets the benchmark on whether or not they have the understanding to jump right into that prescribed fire realm. A lot of us learn by sight and sound through our careers, and so that helps facilitate that. If they don't have that, if they don't pass the exam, then maybe that's one where they go through the coursework and then the longer route. But we wanted to give that option to folks. So we have such a robust forest industry in Oregon that wanted to make sure that we make the program as implementable as possible.
Yeah.
While also reducing liability to the state for offering the carrot right at the end.
Yeah. But I get what you're asking, Katie, which is basically like, even if we had someone who took the exam, failed the exam, and needed to go through the training, that's how we assess that, whether or not someone needs to take the training is whether or not they can pass the exam if they are trying to apply for historical recognition. But what we don't have an option for currently in the rules is for that person to go through the training if they didn't pass the exam without doing the certification book. And I get what you're saying, because there are certainly, I'm imagining people that know how to lead burns and do all that operational work who are rusty on some of the other pieces of planning and the regulations, or who are coming from another state potentially, who don't have any clue how things work in Oregon, which is a different place than California or Washington, but they can burn really well. And so maybe we need to look at, what that would look like in terms of updating the rules at some point to that end. And I have a note about that because I think that's a really good point.
Well, I didn't mean to take us on a
No, we got
winding
time.
path,
That's what we're here for.
But no, I think this was really helpful for me and hopefully others in Zoomlandia as far as, scope and charge of the group. Because I knew for sure we'd be in charge, we'd be creating recommendations on the revocation, but I think this provides a lot of clarity for me on the front side as well with how this body will be used. So thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, for whatever it's worth, I was on the RAC too. I was on the RAC as the Prescribed Fire Council rep until I was selected for this position with ODF, and then I stepped out of that space, but was at all those meetings. And now that I have to go back through these rules all the time, I'm like, oh, why didn't we do this? Oh, we should have done that, and it's never perfect, right? You do your best in the time frame you have to get the rules before the Board of Forestry and pass so we can get the program up and running. But I think Tim told me at one point we can modify them, not just on the fly. There's a process for that, and I'm not even entirely clear on what that looks like. But I think these are the things that we need to hear so that we take note of that and are able to have that be an evolving process that's not just like, well, we passed the rules, we got to follow them now. What are we going to do?
I have just one more quick question,
Yeah.
hopefully on that. So related to the approved trainers list.
Yeah.
Will this body be reviewing any of those applications, or is that gonna be just ODF? Cause I'm thinking of folks that have like MOUs to provide NWCG type training for, S-130, S-190, et cetera. If they're gonna have a more streamlined process, or what that might look like, where folks are maybe more focused on wildfire aspect, but already have these agreements in place. I don't think we contemplated that much in the RAC, so.
No, we've got a template for an MOU already developed that folks can, and it's very similar to the NWCG MOU.
Okay,
So it will allow us to enter into an agreement, so then training providers can take the content that we create and it's the learning objectives and the assessment. The assessment is not, you can't modify that. Everybody's got to take the same test. It's not going to be changed. The learning objectives, same thing. They're not going to be changed. But then whatever you want to flavor that with is up to you. And that's the way NWCG is meant to work too. You get learning objectives. You can go and make your PowerPoint however you want it, as long as you teach to the objectives. And those objectives lead to your ability to pass the assessment. And so the training providers will enter into an agreement with ODF through an MOU, and then they will do their training, and they will provide a certificate of completion, which is part of what the folks who want to become a certified burn manager bring back to ODF, their certificate, which shows they passed the test. And we can administer training and assessment too, but I'm just one person here. So I don't see myself doing that. Maybe if someone wants to, though, it says in the rules they can request that from ODF. If for example, they're looking for the historical recognition, they don't want to go find a training provider, I'll just give them the exam. That's a no-brainer. But as far as delivering actual curriculum, maybe someday. But yeah, there will be an MOU process for them to apply to be training providers. We enter into an MOU. We can go over that in the rules if that would help folks understand better what that looks like, or you can go look what is required of training providers, but it's 2 years of adult education. They don't have to be experts in the subject matter at hand, but it would be nice to see some expertise in that, in delivering that information.
thank you.
Yeah, hopefully that helps.
So the short answer is the advisory committee helps set the framework that the department and makes recommendation on the framework the department works under in implementing the program, but the bulk of the administrative work will be done by the department in the end. And you all have day jobs too, so we don't need to overburden our committees with extra work, but we do really value their input and advice and recommendations.
Yeah, I'm just thinking at the forefront, obviously, there's gonna be more of a glut of work for this body as we get things set up.
Yep.
But for sure.
And some of the questions we don't know what we're going to ask to come back at the next meeting. So that's some of the navigating that's going to be taking place in the future.
Yes. For sure. Well, anything else from the group with that? That was some good discussion and questions, and I appreciate that you brought that stuff up, Amanda. I think it's helpful to go back over this stuff because you can read the rules, and then when you actually talk about them with other people, they seem to start making more sense, or not. Okay. Well, I think, are we done with that section?
I think so.
Okay. Well, the next order of business is selection of a chairperson. And, with that, we're looking, I know that, there's some folks here who know each other and some who don't know each other, but we're looking for a nomination for a chairperson and then an acceptance of that nomination. So we'll open up the floor to the group for that and go from there. John?
I nominate Katie Sauber.
Okay.
I can't figure out how to raise my hand. Thanks, John. I in turn am gonna shift directions and actually nominate Colby Drake. I think Colby would be a great chair. We work together on the Prescribed Fire Council as is. Not only can he represent the Prescribed Fire Council, but he has a lot of experience on the ground burning, as well as working with all sorts of different partners, whether it be tribal, state, federal, private. I think Colby would make a great chair, so I'm gonna shift that direction towards him.
I guess we need to vote then, because we got 2 people nominated.
Well, neither one's
And that's
accepted yet.
Oh, wait, that's true. Who else?
Do either of you accept your nomination first?
Yeah, this is Colby. I would accept Katie's nomination. Thank you, Katie.
I'm gonna gracefully not accept my nomination, as I have my plate very full with the Prescribed Fire Council right now.
I was all excited about a vote, obviously. But I do appreciate, John, you nominating Katie, because they make a lot of sense in so many ways. And, you know, I could see them both doing a fantastic job. So I have no preference here, but I'm excited that Colby's interested and willing to take that on. I know he'll do a great job. So.
Any discussion? Any opposition? The 2 words you have to say for formalities for it, so. Okay.
All right, well,
Congratulations, Colby.
yeah.
Thank you, everybody. I do really appreciate this opportunity, and yeah, this will be exciting, and looking forward to just, yeah, making these opportunities for more people to get good fire on the ground. So thank you.
So we have a choice here about proceeding with our, that's a clap. Not a handwaving. Okay, cool. Yes. We can move through our break time that is scheduled, because we're quite ahead of our timeframes right now. Or we can take a break. Seems kind of early to take a break because we've only been meeting for 40 minutes. Shall we go ahead and review our charter? That's going to take a bit, so that'll take us to probably our natural break time or somewhere close to that.
I have another question.
Oh, well, now we're talking. All right.
That I was thinking about,
Cool.
and maybe it'll feed into the charter.
Okay.
So Amanda Sullivan asked her again, sorry. So it's a running joke at my association that I always have clarifying questions. So everybody, anytime there's a question, it's like, oh, there's a clarifying question, everybody. So anyways, but one other question I was thinking about was related to the assessment. And are you guys determining the questions? Will we have a chance to review questions, or are we going to ask for feedback from people that take the assessment? Like, how's that going to work?
Yeah, so
And maybe I'm getting ahead of us.
no, this is what I envisioned was similar to what we've done with our burn plan templates. And I guess maybe I should tell you all why I brought that up right away. Maybe it seems premature to be reviewing a burn plan template, but that's one of the first of all, it's foundational to everything else we do. The assessment, the training, everything should tie back to a burn plan. But secondly, it's in high demand from us as a department to provide something consistent to be used. And so John has been a part of that, and I know I've run this through a number of you to provide feedback already as the process was moving forward. But we wanted to make sure we got feedback from this group about those templates. So I would imagine it being very similar to that as the learning objectives and the assessment are finalized, which are based on those templates, that comes up for the next committee meeting. Or, you know, in between that we provide that, but perhaps it's an email solicitation of feedback, if that's allowed, assuming it is. I'm still learning about some of this process here, but yeah, and so like, for example, our updates later on the curriculum are partially to give you all a heads up that we'll be providing that for this group to give feedback on for sure.
And I think what can be easily provided to the advisory committee here is the content or the scope of the assessment and the subject matter that'll go into it. I wouldn't imagine that we would share the questions per se right off the bat, but what will be evaluated to make sure it's sufficient for what you all think should be in an assessment.
Yeah, or making sure that we have an opportunity to provide, you know, some suggestions, and then if it's already covered, it's covered, but if we provide something that isn't, then it provides you gues an opportunity to incorporate.
Absolutely.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, we don't want this process to be happening in a bubble without an opportunity for this committee to help make sure it's the best product possible. And then when I started creating the burn plan templates, I was doing it on my own, and I had a choice. You know, I could just come up with a template, bring it to this group, or I could get a group together to work on it. And so the group that has been working on the template includes Kyle Lapham from Washington DNR, who runs the Certified Burn Manager program in Washington, Heather Heward from the University of Idaho, and John Punches from OSU Extension. And that is, you know, that group happened to be kind of organically. Heather was somebody I started working with on this mostly because I wanted the learning objectives, curriculum, and the assessment and everything else to make sense from an educational standpoint, from how you craft that stuff. I mean, I know how to do operational and prescribed fire planning, but she's got an eye towards the training side and how to organize information in that educational context. Kyle Lapham joined the team because he reached out to me and said, "Hey, do you guys have a burn plan template you're using?" And I said, "Funny you should ask. We're in the middle of making one. Do you want to help?" And he said, "Yeah." And then John Punches had just started working with the Prescribed Fire Council repping for OSU Extension. And it's like, well, they're going to be rolling out a lot of this curriculum and content. And he's got a similar eye from a practitioner standpoint and from an educational standpoint, but specifically with landowners and the public. Heather's working in the university system, but he's working like out in the field in the world. So having those different perspectives together, and Kyle, by the way, is also an old colleague of Katie and I's from the Nature Conservancy, and I know his burning background. He's been burning forever and a day. He's from Arkansas originally, and so he's got a ton of prescribed fire experience and background. So he's not just somebody that came into Certified Burn Manager from the outside. He's coming from the prescribed fire world, and has, you know, cut his teeth in that space. So that's the group that created these templates. I did more of the pile burn plans template on my own because that's a pretty short and sweet 1-page, 2-page or whatever. Whereas the understory broadcast burn plan template has been rolled over and over and over and vetted and changed. And that has been through various channels, that group as well as within ODF to make, because really we need it to work at the field office level for us. And so we need our districts who are going to be managing these to have it make sense to them as much as anyone. I know that's a lot on the templates, but that's to explain to you the process there before it even gets to this group. And it'll be similar with the other pieces of information that we seek feedback on.
So for some background for some folks who are new to committees, the way the process works is we value your time too. So we want to bring the staff work, have that ready to go for feedback and review. That's why you hear it. Well, it seems that there may be a bunch of work done pre-meeting. That's intentional to give something to the committee that they can push against or look at and have substantive review on as we move forward. Otherwise, it'd be this meeting would have been very short and straight to the point. So that's why just because something is looks like it's a full document, that's intentional, but it's not meant that it's prescriptive or set in stone. So it's we want to put a basis there of to give something for review and for comment that we can remold through what the committee advises.
Yeah, and I think another piece of that too is that this committee has just been forming while we've been forming the group to form the burn plan templates, where now this committee's formed. So anybody who wants to be a part of providing input more so than what we do in these meetings, I'm totally fine with that. we need all the help we can get on this stuff, you know, and it seems to me like group think forms when you don't get enough minds to the table to look at stuff and turn them over. So, and again, that burn plan template, both of them, but specifically the understory broadcast burn plan template has changed significantly since the beginning of that process. And I think for the better, because it, you know, now I think maybe we'll change it more based on what you all think. We've got time for that. So,
You want to do the pile burning first?
shall we do that now instead of the charter review?
Yeah, and I'll just
What was it
mention, I
next?
mean, we will need to be careful now that the
What's
group
charter
is formed
review?
with public meeting law,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
Don't have to be careful, have to follow it.
yes.
So,
Okay.
but yeah, sorry, I got ahead of you on the agenda.
No, that's okay.
So charter
um,
next.
Yeah, let's do that real quick. Well, I don't know how quick it'll be.
I don't have a bunch of clarifying
There
questions.
will probably be some
fine.
clarifying questions. But yeah, let's get that pulled up. I didn't provide this in advance because we were working on it right before this meeting, and I figured it would be better to walk through it and make sure we're all on the same page instead of relying on people taking the time to read it. So this is not entirely dissimilar to the RAC charter that was used. And
Yep.
still getting that fit to the
I had to
screen.
flip to a different tab. There we go.
Yeah. So yeah, there's some of this is standardized. It's not, you know, anything that we created that was brand new, but it was brought over from the RAC charter for those of you who are a part of that process. But it's really just to make sure that everybody understands what the regulatory statutes are that inform this process and inform prescribed burn policies in general. And it also kind of outlined where this all started, which was with Senate Bill 762 that was passed in 2001. And it required this program to be established and implemented prior to, and we'll probably find typos as we go through, prior to the Senate Bill 762, there was a Senate bill that had passed that created statute that applied to this, and that's under 526. But it was a may rather than a shall, so it basically said that we were allowed to stand up the program, but there was no fiscal ask associated with it. There really wasn't staff dedicated to the program, so it never really got launched. And so the Oregon Prescribed Fire Council, Sustainable Northwest, and Nature Conservancy lobbied ODF and the legislature to actually create a shall, which is what 762 includes. Originally, that was under Bill 2572, House Bill 2572, but then it got wrapped into the Omnibus Wildfire Bill. So the RAC met throughout 2021 and 2022 and created the rules governing the implementation of the program, and those were passed by the Board of Forestry and submitted to the Secretary of State for filing in November of last year. So as we've said, it's not a decision-making body, so this group's not going to be, other than we almost voted on a chair, but that's the only decision-making really. Otherwise, it's an advisory group that makes recommendations, and that's really providing perspective, input, and assistance to us as a department, so we can administer the program pursuant to the rules as they're passed. So we will consider the recommendations of this group when creating curriculum, as you asked about, templates for burn plans, which we're going to go through here today, and certifications of those seeking historical recognition and revocation certification. I'm glad I put that all in there.
Yeah, I should have read that.
No, that's okay, because we didn't provide it to you.
Yeah.
This is in the charter, which this is in our charter. It's not explicitly said in the rules, but you know, I think the rules are very clear about when we have a revocation, we're going to bring that to this group. But doesn't mean that we can't add the other stuff which we have here, right? Okay, so guiding principles in terms of and or policies in advising ODF and implementing this program. Under 47705, the preservation of forests and the conservation of forest resources through the prevention and suppression of forest fires. Hereby, and that's part of our mission. In order to accomplish the purposes and policies in that section, there's a need for a complete coordinated protection system, and that is including structural protection, indirect, shall not inhibit, etc. resources. You can read that. And so, these are just standard things that we include, right? And then we added in there the relevant section of ORS 526-360, which is where it explicitly spells out the Certified Burn Manager Program, the limited civil liability protection associated with that program, and what is considered under definition to be prescribed fire according to that. And then any other relevant policy considerations. So under membership, we have the folks here who are the 7 voting members who've already been introduced here today. And we have Bruce Jubot as Kenny Rose's alternate, because Kenny was not able to be here today. Stacy McCarter is the mitigation program manager, and I think maybe just to quickly mention that I'm the prescribed fire coordinator, and my job is to stand up this program in working for Stacy, but Stacy's the mitigation program manager overall, right? So she's really the point of contact still for everything. And anyone who goes to the Prescribed Fire website is going to see her name on there. And then, she and Tim and I will coordinate anything that she receives from there. So she's still the gatekeeper, even if I'm the voice, I guess, you might say. And anybody who needs to talk to her, I mean, I think Kenny, I reached out to directly, and he told me, or he reached out to me directly about an alternate. If that happens, we'll coordinate, and it's fine. But technically by the charter, Stacy's the person to contact there. Let's see, keep going. Board of Forestry members may be present to listen in, and ODF staff will be here during the meeting as resources, but we are not considered part of the advisory committee. We are receiving the advice, recommendations, and perspective of the committee. But these are public meetings, and so non-committee members can attend, and they are here today. In fact, that's almost as many, if not more, people here attending who are not on the committee, which is great. And there is time on our agenda today dedicated to receiving input from those folks. There will be time limits for each person, and that is based on how many people there are, because we have a limited amount of time. Although maybe today we'll have a little extra time since we're blazing through our agenda. Chair and subcommittee. So the advisory committee will elect a chair, which they did today, and that person will work with us in leading and organizing subcommittees as needed. That will be limited in terms of expectations. We do not want the chair to feel burdened at all. We're here to do the bulk of the work. It's really so that they have a leadership responsibility and can make sure that they're representing the interests of the committee to us in the formation of those subcommittees. Let's see, all committee materials will be provided electronically.
Oh, yeah. I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
So, and maybe it gets to this, but I don't think it does. And sorry for those on the Zoom, I did get a printed version, so I'm able to go ahead, I guess, perks of being in person.
Yeah, we'll provide this electronically to everybody.
So typically for charters and bylaws type documents, there will be a definition of responsibilities for the chair. So I wanted to see if that's a section that we should add to make it clear what the roles and responsibilities of that chair are. If it's to work with you guys to develop agendas, if there's something else, that might be helpful to add.
Okay. How do other folks feel about that? I think that's a good recommendation.
Yeah, for me, that definitely makes a lot of sense. I know we've had some conversations, but yeah, having that all lined out and everything would definitely be helpful, and not just for myself, but for upcoming.
Like the leading and organizing subcommittees, that could be in a separate section or maybe a subsection under
Yeah.
that for roles and responsibilities of the chair with some additional items perhaps. But
Sure. Yeah, and you know, when I went to the rules, there wasn't a whole lot there.
Yeah.
And so I kind of partly reflected back, well, they could help us organize the agenda. That would make sense. Because I chatted with them about that. And then I plugged in there, you know, somebody's gonna have to organize subcommittees if they form. But yeah,
And some of the processes we're trying to align between our various committees. We have
No,
the-
you're okay.
We have the Smoke Management Advisory Committee, similarly too. So we're kind of take what works great over there and bring it over here, and learn over here and bring it over there.
but yeah, that makes sense. What do other folks think about that suggestion? I mean, I think Colby said good, got thumbs up. Okay. We'll work on that, make that clear in the charter.
And then is there, I guess, in addition to that, sorry, I have
No.
another question. Is there gonna be a term limit for chair? For a term or anything like that?
My thought was that it would follow that individual's existing term limit. So I don't remember what Colby's term limit is, but if he had like a 3-year term limit, then he would be in chair position until his term was up, and then it would be going to a vote again. But that should be made explicit.
Yeah, we might wanna clarify that
Yeah.
in there as
Yeah.
well, just as a standard practice.
Yeah.
And if they can, you know, be nominated and elected for a second term and just, again, just so everybody's
Yeah.
on the same page, especially as people come off, new people come on, you know, what that expectation is.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, cause Colby, we could have said, you know, you're gonna be chair for 10 years.
But then it's like,
And your term is automatically gonna, you
Yeah.
know,
Well,
go
and
forward.
I think that's why I just assumed that it would follow their term on the committee, because you can't have them be in place longer than they're already gonna be on the committee.
Yeah.
And the max length, well, you can serve 2 consecutive 3-year terms. But I would probably specify that if it's gonna follow the length of their existing term on the committee, it should come up for a vote if they're renewing their same, like if they're gonna renew, because then you could have the same chair for 6 years in theory, which isn't necessarily a problem, but we should ask if that's what we want.
Yeah.
John added in, chair should be an annual role elected at first meeting of the calendar year for his preference.
Okay. So that's what he thinks.
And for folks, committee members who are on and when that mute button disappears and you can't get off mute, anything you type into the chat, we do grab that and put that in the meeting summary. So anything you put in there is part of the official record.
Cool.
Yeah, and I'll just mention, I appreciate John's perspective on that. I know I sit on the new adaptive management committee for ODF, and we elected to have, I think, 2-year terms. There's co-chair, so it's a little bit different, but I think we elected 2-year terms just for continuity, because it can be really tough, especially if we are only having required to only have 2 meetings a year.
Right.
To maintain that continuity. But so I think that there's a few other options. So we might want to have some more discussion, or maybe you guys come with a suggestion and we provide some additional advice, recommendations on that. But
Yeah. Well, how do we want to navigate this decision? Is this something that we're going to take feedback on and go to our drawing board on, or?
I think we got 3 folks who have jumped into this. I'd like to get a few. Oh, hold on. I agree with John, the option of re-electing their current chair, as long as their term is not expiring.
Yeah.
So we can go and bring that back with a potential closer to final draft at the next CBM AC meeting, and have that aligned in here, and we'll work with the current chair on some of that language of how to get it squared up as well, to help make sure we have better alignment moving forward. So we'll have another draft with the feedback that's in the chat pulled together.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that the annual chair role it couldn't really be more than that because we have people who are only in there for a year as of right now. And I don't know how much that's, and then there will be people who only have a year left by the time that comes up. So I can see that making sense. Anything else? All right.
I appreciate you giving me the time. to
Absolutely.
express that.
It's wonderful. We need this. Okay, so all committee materials will be provided electronically as a sustainability measure, unless you're here, and then we'll print it up for you. Meeting notices, well, okay, we've got printed materials here. All the recordings will be on the YouTube channel and to the webpage. And the meeting recordings will be used as the formal meeting minutes. They control in the event of a conflict. Technical input from agencies, organizations, or individuals with specialized expertise will be available to the advisory committee as issues arise. As I said before, we're meeting at minimum twice a year starting today, but we will be meeting more frequently for this first year of program establishment. As far as collaboration protocols, we're using a quorum of 51% of the advisory committee organizations listed above. The meetings of the advisory committee and its subcommittees are open to the public, as we said, and they include an opportunity for public comment. And then notice of these meetings will be posted in advance of the meetings on the ODF project website. ODF and the chair will develop working agendas for each meeting. So see that it's in there, but it's not under like clearly what are your responsibilities. So I think that makes sense to make sure you call that out, even if it's duplicative in the charter. And then meeting agendas and materials will be sent electronically to members in advance, with the exception of this charter. Well, we developed the charter while we were making that the rule in the charter, right? So let's see. And then here's the, doing how we conduct ourselves in meetings. These are our commitments to each other that we prepare for and set aside time for this meeting and the entire process. We participate fully, honestly, and fairly, commenting constructively and specifically. We speak respectfully, briefly, and non-repetitively. Not speaking again on a subject until all other members who are desiring to speak have had the opportunity to. We allow people to say what is true for them without fear of reprisal, avoiding side conversations during the meetings, providing information as much in advance as possible in which such information is to be used, and share all relevant information to the maximum extent possible. Generate and explore all options on the merits with an open mind, listening to different points of view, with the goal of understanding the underlying interests of other certified burn manager advisory committee members. Consult regularly with your appointing, nominating bodies, and provide input in a clear and concise manner. Each member agrees to work towards fair, practical, and durable recommendations that reflect the diverse interests of the entire advisory committee and the public. When we communicate with others, we accurately summarize the advisory committee process, discussion, and meetings, presenting a full, fair, and balanced view of the issues and arguments out of respect for the process and other members. We do not attempt to affect a different outcome outside of this process, outside of the advisory committee process. Oh, we forgot to remove that comment for some reason. Here, stand by. There we go. Let's see. Non-attempt to affect a different outcome outside of the advisory committee process once the group has reached a consensus recommendation. We strive vigorously for consensus and closure on issues. Despite that we're a quorum decision-making body, we're still going towards consensus, right? And we self-regulate and help other members abide by these commitments. Let's see, under public comment, there will be public comment opportunities. We've spoken about that. They will be limited to a maximum of 3 minutes per person. So that is limited despite how much time we have. Participants are encouraged to submit written comments to Stacy at her email so that they can be circulated in advance to the entire group for consideration. I think that's really important to highlight that for those who are here who are not on the committee, that your comments are very valuable, but if you provide them in advance and the whole committee can look at them before the meeting, they can think about what they might want to say about them, and it can be more of a back and forth as opposed to just receiving comments and that's it. The process for the group making recommendations. So the department will assist the advisory committee and its members in identifying objectives and addressing the diversity of perspectives and developing substantive practical recommendations. So each voting member of this group will have one vote, and a vote represents that the member will strongly recommend to their government organization or group that they should support or oppose the vote upon proposal consistent with the member's vote. The advisory committee will strive for and use a consensus recommendation-making approach to determine their level of agreement on proposals. And this will allow the advisory committee members to distinguish underlying values, interests, and concerns with the goal of developing widely accepted solutions. So consensus does not mean 100% agreement, but it really means support for a position taken as a whole. And this means that a member can support a consensus proposal, even though they would prefer to have it modified in some manner in order to give it their full support. So consensus is a process of give and take. It's, to find common ground and develop creative solutions that everyone can support. And so, what that means is voicing your concerns, right? But doing so in a way that will help us get you to the point of, I can live with that last quote, because that's how we determine that consensus is reached. Since all voting members supporting an idea can say, I can live with that. When developing recommendations, the committee will address each rule component individually and in various combinations, and will decide on whether it wants to make a package recommendation for the entire rule at the end of the process. So 1, 2, 3 consensus polling is the approach used there. And for those who aren't familiar with that process, it articulates points of agreement as well as articulating concerns that require further exploration. So this is how you get from I'm all on board to I can live with that. And it's a procedure for assessing the group's opinions and adjusting proposals. So using this approach, ODF will articulate the proposal, and then each certified burn manager advisory committee voting member will offer a 1, 2, or 3, and that reflects the following. A 1 is full support. You like it, you don't have questions, you don't need to be convinced of anything. A number 2 means that you agree with the proposal, but would prefer to have it modified in some way to give it full support. But you still will support it even if your suggested modifications are not supported by the rest of the group, because the proposal is worthy of general support. And a 3 is I refuse to support. So what we're trying to get to is everyone to be a 1 ideally, but if not a 1 and a 2. But if we've got 3, we got work to do. ODF will repeat the consensus voting process as reasonably practical and as time allows to assist the group in achieving consensus regarding a recommendation so that everybody is a 1 or a 2. Either way, the result will be noted in the ODF staff report and for the advisory committee report.
So Amanda, is
Yeah.
another way to say that sort of like 1 is support, 2 is support with amendments. So whether or not your amendments are agreed upon.
Yeah.
3 is oppose unless amended or straight up oppose.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah.
And a lot of this too is, I don't envision the group coming across highly contentious issues of policy. However, having a way to default in a charter to how to navigate disagreement is always useful, even though disagreement may never happen. So this might be a part of the charter that's never exercised. But it's good to have in there of how each advisory body has how they navigate their process and have that structure in place.
And then if a consensus is not likely, we move to a majority and minority recommendations. And the votes of those present at the meeting will be taken and recorded as a majority minority recommendation in the meeting summary, which will include the specific majority recommendation, the specific minority recommendation, along with the name supporting each recommendation. And that is defined as previously mentioned above 51% of the advisory committee organizations noted above. And then summary, meeting summaries will serve as the record of the recommendations, as supplemented by the addition of the advisory committee member statements who elect to submit additional information by the deadline to be established at the last advisory committee meeting. ODF will package all of this in its staff report to the board. Let's see, additional provisions, just kind of wrap this up. We expect that there will be regular communication with the affiliated group you're representing. And so regular two-way communication between advisory committees and their appointing jurisdictions or organizations to ensure meaningful representation of those interests. And time will be set aside on the agenda for reports from this outreach. We wouldn't be doing that today because this is our inaugural meeting, so we don't expect that you have taken things back to your organization to report back to us on, but we will in the future. And then transparency and media.
Can I do a quick go back?
Yeah.
That's sort of related to all of this. So there's, from my perspective, there's a little bit of a contradiction in the previous section. It talks about how each member will have one vote.
Yeah.
But then it says that vote represents how the member will basically communicate that to their organization that they represent. But then it talks about if we don't meet consensus, a vote will be taken and then there'll be a majority and minority position. So that's sort of two different processes, one in which a vote represents how they'll communicate with their organization, and two, a vote of what their position or their organization's position is. So we might need to
Get them detangled.
yeah, kind of
I see what
square
you're
that,
saying, yeah.
Okay.
to clarify what a vote is,
Yeah.
or maybe talking about consensus. I don't know, we just need to, I think, detangle those because it's
Yeah.
a little bit contradictory.
But it's clear, is it clear that one is basically what we default to if the other doesn't work?
Yes,
Okay,
I think,
cool.
yeah, I think the 1, 2, 3 subsections in that make a lot of sense. It's just ensuring that we are all clear on the committee what a vote is or how what, you know,
Yeah.
what it is that we're saying, you know. So anyways, I just want to make sure that I am clear
Yeah.
if I am to vote on something, that, you know, if I'm just letting folks know how I'm gonna communicate that back to AOL.
Oh, I
or
see. Okay.
or like, this is AOL's stance,
I see
right?
what
Like I've
you're
already
saying.
communicated about that,
Yep.
and this is the
Gotcha.
decision, and it's in the majority or minority if consensus isn't reached, right?
Yep.
So I think just clarifying that would be helpful for me.
Good. John?
I think, and maybe I'm just saying Amanda's thing a different way. I think the intent out of this about how we communicate out is that we want to be clear about the outcomes of the meeting. And so if we have a process here by which we come to consensus, that should be part of what we communicate. If we're communicating to the public, or we're communicating back to organizations, the CBM group met and we came to consensus that this was the right pathway forward. Or it may be the CBM group met and this was a little bit contentious, and in the end we had to go to this process where there's a majority and a minority, and here's the two perspectives, and it's really my responsibility talking to my organization to reflect both of those, not just the one that I happen to vote for, because maybe I'm the outlier in my own group, my own organization, right? So I think we need to be clear about the expectations within this document about how we report back, and I would like to see it capture that idea that we're just going to be conscientious about communicating what the discussion was and what the outcomes are.
I proposed something in the interim before we navigate the last page. I believe the last page of this here is what we'll do is we'll highlight this for now, and we're all taking notes of it. We'll send it out to the advisory committee as staff work, and we'll for comments back, and then we'll review all those comments at the next meeting, along with some kind of some middle ground language, and then we'll have that on there to hopefully get it finalized. So we'll compile everyone's edits in the same document at the end. So, okay, got a
Now,
couple.
I just have one more suggestion, and I want to make sure I'm looking at the screen to make sure nobody else has their hand up, because I don't want to filibuster here, but
Okay.
I like having the statement in here of, you know, I can live with that, of what we're trying to get to. But similarly, maybe we should, maybe I'm nitpicking here, but it's a charter, so it's important.
Yep.
But maybe we should say, like, my organization can live with that. If we
Yeah.
are truly representing an organization or a jurisdiction, just again, for consistency's sake, that it's not like I, Amanda Sullivan Astor, can live with that. It's I've gone back to my organization and we can live with that, or
Right, that's a good point.
just for consistency.
Totally, makes sense.
It's a good one.
All right, I think we were talking about, transparency in media. Members agree that transparency is essential to all deliberations in that regard. And all advisory committee members will notify Stacy McCarter of written communications with the media, obviously about this group and OPM processes, and that members agree to direct public testimony to Stacy, and that these communications will be included in the public record and copied to all the rest of the members of the advisory committee. Individual members should not speak on behalf of the entire advisory committee. And whenever reasonable, advisory committees and staff will refer press, citizens, and other inquiries to Stacy McCarter. And it's up to Stacy, like she may refer that to me, she may refer that to Tim, she may take it on herself, but that's her decision and role as the program manager to be that gatekeeper. Disclosure of public official conflicts of interest. Some members of this committee may be public officials, and they are required to make an announcement of the nature of a conflict of interest each time the issue giving rise to the conflict is disclosed or acted upon.
I don't think we have any public officials in here, but it's good baseline language in
I
the
guess
charter.
I was trying to decide, like, does that include the feds?
It'd be
Or
if we had a county commissioner.
Right,
That's,
okay.
that would where. That one
So
would
maybe
apply.
we'll,
But I do think that, I mean, I think there's more than just public official conflict of interest.
Yeah.
You know, I'm thinking specifically for AOL, if there was a revocation
oh,
and
right.
it was an AOL member, like how would we, you know, I guess that could be potentially a perceived conflict of interest. It probably wouldn't be a conflict of interest because, you know, I mean, I guess I represent those individual companies. I don't represent the actual employee, I represent the company. So, you know, whereas this is going to be an individual certification. So, but there could be a perceived conflict of interest. So maybe we should have something.
You need to
related
include
to
something
that.
in there because, for example, TNC could have certified burn managers
On staff.
on
yeah.
staff, Justina, even OSU. I mean, yeah, and frankly, committee members themselves who become CBM, heaven forbid we have to look at revoking them, but
even
Yeah.
the looking at the certification of historic experience,
Yep.
there's probably people on the committee that will go through that
Okay.
process.
That's good.
So
that's
just,
a really
We'll get
good-
another conflict section added.
yeah, just making sure that we understand, you know, the refusal,
Yep.
things like that.
Right. That makes sense.
Colby.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how this would play in, but I know I'm representing the Oregon Prescribed Fire Council, but just still as a tribal wearing that hat, there could be some issues with just sovereign stuff and conflict of interest if it's dealing with possible tribal lands or tribal members and things like that. So just trying to, think out loud and outside of the box a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. We need to address that as well.
Excellent. Hit the keyboard. Okay.
Let's see. So we'll update that. Meetings and records. Obviously we've already said this, these meetings are open to the public and the notice about these meetings will be provided in advance. I think we're looking at minimum 2 weeks in advance. And you can participate through, I know we have telephonic conference calls, which we don't really do that now in Zoomlandia. But all records of the body, including formal documents, discussion drafts, et cetera, are public records. Communications refer to all statements and votes made during meetings, memoranda, work products, records, documents, text messages, pictures, or materials developed to fulfill the charge, including electronic mail correspondence. Personal notes of individual members taken at public meetings might be the public record to the extent they relate to the conduct of the public's business. Let's see.
In simple English, we have transparency, and we want to operate the business of the committee in the public eye. That's the intent and purpose and what we strive for with this, and so the public can see how their business is being conducted.
Exactly.
And so the public record is going to be, for the most part, the Zoom recording. There aren't going to be like minutes transcribed. That will be the public record.
They're generally, it's the video that'll be uploaded on YouTube. Yeah. And then there'll be a meeting summary of who attended the Zoom chat, okay. Any decisions that were made by the committee, any important notes, just a little summary document, because anyone could go watch the video.
Yeah. For as far as amendments or interpretation, the department will lead an advisory committee discussion designed to reach a consensus on any proposed scope and change, or scope and charge, guiding principles, collaborative protocols, and process for advisory committee recommendations, amendments to this document. Any remaining amendments can be made informally. The terms of this document, except for those required by law or process guidelines, they're not my binding mandates. So ultimately, ODF will make the final decision to the proposed amendments and interpretation issues, taking in all the feedback we've received here today. And participation in this process is agreement to abide by the terms of the document. Sign right here.
So, again, that's a lot to take in on Zoom. Apologies for not getting that out ahead of time, but you'll have it shortly. John.
So I've got three things. So one's really easy. The first time you talk about quorum, you say 51%, and it's just stated as 51% quorum. With a 7-person group, you can never have a 51% quorum. So either say at least 51% or say majority of voting members, something like that. So that way we're not accidentally making ourselves always disqualified. The other one, and this relates back to the conflict of interest, but I was early on thinking of there's probably times when some of us should recuse ourselves from voting because we would have some sort of conflict of interest. So for interest, that would fall in those situations where if you were deciding that OSU should no longer be a content provider, right? I probably should present my case on that and then step aside, and actually best thing would be for me to just like leave the meeting and let you guys come to your conclusion on that, because we don't need that the potential conflict there of that person being in the room. But that's really for you at ODF to decide how you want to handle that situation. So I would recommend thinking about that and putting something in there to decide how you want to deal with those types of potential conflict of interest situations where we really probably as members should be recusing ourselves. So I don't have a specific on that, but I think that maybe something should be addressed there. And then the final piece, so these are public meetings, and I'm not sure what you're required to do through ODF in public meetings, but I don't like to discuss individual people in a broad public setting. If you're asking me to decide whether some individual person should be revoked from having their certified burn manager stuff, I am not going to feel comfortable in being completely open about that, even if I know the situation really well, if I've got to be subjecting myself to everybody in the world potentially watching that, right? So think about whether there is a potential opportunity there for closed session when we're dealing, to me, the situation there would be when you're dealing with an individual person, either from like we're thinking about should this person be accepted because they have submitted theirs for historical recognition, and they're being reviewed for that. But now we're reviewing an individual person's qualifications, not the criteria, but the individual person, or those revocations of an individual person or an individual entity, right? I always want those persons to have their opportunities to make their case up or down, but I think that the decision making, that the recommendation, because we're voting, I think that recommendation process, if it's possible, should be done in the closed session that is not publicly reviewed. The final vote where it says it was, 3-4 or whatever, the vote number should certainly be reported out, but I don't know that that individual discussion is there. So you guys figure that out and tell us what we have to do, and then we'll deal with it. Thank you.
That's a great point. For public meetings, generally the rule is everything's in the public eye unless provided. I'll get some guidance from what could, if this committee has the authority to implement an executive session. I do sit on the board over at DPSST for the Fire Policy Committee, and all of those decisions are made in the public there. So I'll take some deference and get some guidance and get back to the committee on what your workspace is. Thank you for sharing that.
Can't ask for more than that, Tim. That's all we need.
Katie.
Thanks, John. That was really great input and brought a thought up for me that I'm not sure should go in the charter, but I wanted to raise it anyway. Where so far I understand we're giving recommendations, we're not actually making decisions about individuals, but even in the realm of making recommendations, I would not be comfortable without outside additional expert input on, say, a scenario where a tribal member is being reviewed for potential certification or something like that. I just think there would be a real disservice to an individual if we didn't have an opportunity for greater input from people who are knowledgeable in cultural cases where this group is lacking. And if you say this situation I'm talking about, yes, Colby is on the committee, but as one person is not comfortable being seen as like the decider about a situation, there be an opportunity for a call out for additional support or something like that. So this may not apply to the charter, but thought I'd share it at this time.
Yes.
Yeah, along those same lines, it might be worth considering if there are situations in which we shift the charter to allow for more than 3 minutes for public comment. This could be one of those. If you're bringing in folks to speak to a specific situation or scenario, it may be well suited that 3 minutes is not quite long enough.
So maybe differentiate between public comment versus invited testimony.
Because that's right where I was thinking, John.
Yeah.
So Amanda in the room again, Amanda S in the room. So the other thing that made me think of when John was talking was, we've got information in here about alternates. We might want to clarify that an alternate has all the same rights for voting purposes as the individual that is, the voting member. That might seem like, oh, we should make that assumption, and obviously that's what it is, but we might want to make that clear. And then if there were to be somebody who had to recuse themselves, that could change quorum, and I want to make sure that we can get to quorum, right? And people are busy. This group, people want something done. Ask a busy person. I'm sure we are all very busy. So in addition to that, we might want to have something related to proxies. So like if my alternate and myself are both at something, I could give a proxy vote to Colby or John or Kate or whatever to vote on behalf of AOL, because that's different than like my AOL designated alternate. Just recognizing that we're a small committee, and if you have that recuse, it just, we want to make sure that we can get to that forum for consensus driven polling the.
Okay. Anything else on the charter? That was a good, thorough treatment of that charter, especially given that we didn't provide it in advance. I really appreciate how much folks were able to engage there, and we have some work to do on it, which is good. With that, I think we should probably take our break.
Yeah.
And
10 minute
when- yeah, how much?
10 minutes.
10 minutes? So that would put us back here at, should we just round up to 10:45? Okay, 10:45, and we'll get into the burn plan template. Both of the burn plan templates. All right, we're back. Nice to see everyone. Hope y'all were able to do what you needed to do during the break. Our next order of business is to walk through our burn plans. I think we can start with the pile burn plan. That one should be pretty straightforward, short and sweet. And Tim's gonna drive here and zoom in. I can explain some of the rationale here as we go. I imagine there will probably be some questions as well. And this is a draft. So we have somebody within ODF who is will help clean up some of the stuff you see that's like, why is that grayed out on the outside? And it's just a function of using a template that, well, in that case, it's Tim moving his cursor, but there are a few places where it's kind of wonky in terms of formatting. Don't worry about formatting. That will all get cleaned up by, we have a person within ODF who helps do that kind of work to clean up templates and make them really nice. So this at the top, it has obviously different ways of designating where the pile burn is located. And part of why we have the address and or driving directions is because a lot of times there isn't an address. It's drive up this road, this many miles to this point. And then we have, of course, a legal description, and then the county that it's located in. And then we have a Latin log specifically in degrees decimal minutes. And this is consistent with the understory broadcast burn plan because that's what aircraft uses in the unlikely event that a pile burn requires aircraft response. And then the unit name, which, it may not have any specific name, but just to have that as something in there as an option. Now, to be clear, the grayed out fields are not things that are going to be changed, and the white is what gets filled in. This will be made available as a PDF document as well as a Word document. I imagine folks will try to change it when it's provided as a Word document, but we prefer that not happen because this is being provided as a template that we want to see used. So we have the signatures at the top for the preparer, the certified burn manager, and the landowner. And we have the certified burn manager name and phone number on there because that's the person in charge. And so we want them to be have their information on there so they can be reached. The preparer may be the same person as the landowner or the certified burn manager. That's fine. We just wanted to make sure that there was fields there for all three, because that often is the case that one person's going to write the burn plan, the certified burn manager is going to implement it, and those are not the same as the landowner. And then we have contacts for emergencies as well as burn activities, and we recognize that 2 out of 3 of those are the same, basically, right? So we would welcome any feedback on making that look different if that made more sense. But part of why we did it that way is because we have emergency contacts on one side and then either permitting or activity contacts on the other. And we could also, when we look at the broadcast understory burn plan template, if you see stuff on there that you really think needs to be in here, please say so, because we could make that more explicit. In fact, even now, just looking at this, I'm thinking maybe we should be putting some permitting information in here, because that is in the other template. This was a very much secondary activity to the broadcast understory template, so we could make a lot of things look more like that. We have the burn unit description, and that includes adjacent fuels and pre-burn site prep. That can be clearing around piles, anything that's been done to minimize the potential for spread away from the pile. The objectives, and that can be really straightforward, just consume 90% of the pile, and that's it. It seems like, wow, predicted fire behavior and ignition plan, do you really need that for this? But it's something like, for example, if you want to top light the pile because you want to create biochar, then maybe you need to put that in there. If you want to make sure that the piles get lit on the downslope side so they carry up through the fuels, you want to put that in there. And how you think that pile is going to burn, or those piles are going to burn. And then the holding mop up and patrol plan is all about making sure that there's some thought going into not walking away from the pile burn before it is really finished. And the intent there is in, well, let me back up. Pile burns have turned into wildfires more often than broadcast understory burns have in Oregon, okay? And so it's consistently more of a problem than, and usually it's long after it is thought to be done. So having something in place that says how you're going to make sure those piles are mopped up and patrolled until they're really out, instead of going, oh, the rain's here, we're good, and forgetting about it until it dries out in the next spring and they happen to actually still be going. Contingency, safety, and medical plan.
Hey,
is-
Amanda,
oh, yeah.
really quick on the holding mop up and patrol plan, obviously there's requirements in law for, adequate amount of water and things like that. Would they put that type of information in here as well, like what their water source is? And
Typically, you're
Would
not
that
doing
be-
prescribed burns during fire season when those things are required, though, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say,
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
those
But
are,
if they had an asset on hand,
But they should have
they,
that.
they could put that in
Yeah.
there.
Right,
at
that's
the
it.
location.
but it also goes down under equipment needs. So
Okay, yeah,
you can put, what kind of water handling equipment you're gonna have
yeah.
and where you're gonna get it. So really the holding mop up and patrol plan can refer to the equipment needed. But it's about what you're gonna do with that. Now contingency, safety, and medical. One thing I think that is important to preventing response to a wildfire created by a pile burn is good contingency. This gets more critical in the ignition phase of broadcast and understory burning. But what is your backup plan is basically what that comes down to in the event that something does happen, and that can relate back to holding and mop up. But contingency can be used for adding resources to an ignition, but that's usually that's going to be on the side of understory broadcast burning. Safety and medical, meaning especially if you're in a remote place and you don't have cell service, what are you going to do if someone gets hurt? How do you take care of that person? Making sure you have a plan for that. And then smoke management, which really gets back to the permitting question. The likelihood that you're conducting a pile burn when there's a permit required is pretty slim, but that's for the burn permit side. For smoke management, we probably should consider putting a section in here for that identifies that 7 day in advance registration and then having clearance. So maybe we want to include that.
Well, and I think for ferns, for industrial fire, when folks are doing pile burning on
Yeah.
industrial lands, they have to go through ferns to get a permit.
Right.
So,
And that, again, that's over on the other side on the understory broadcast, so we can,
yeah. I guess the question would somebody be filling this out before they get that permit in ferns or go through smoke management, of which
yeah.
is required? So would they have the number, or maybe, once they receive that number, then they input it in prior to accomplishing the burn, or just thinking through like
either one.
Yeah, just the process that somebody would be going through if they're like, oh, I have to put a number in here, but I don't have my permit yet. So
Right. Yeah, and I mean, the idea is that this is, some of this is filled out in advance and some of it's filled out as you move through the process, right?
Katie,
This goes along with the smoke management concerns. I don't, and I may have missed it, see a spot on this for kind of number of acres and or tonnage, and maybe hyperlinking a pile tonnage calculator. There's a couple different options in existence right now, because that'll feed into the smoke management side of it. And yeah, you're gonna have to put the acres and ferns anyway, so it might as well also be on this document, in my opinion.
Yeah, good point. All right. Good suggestions.
Oh, I get, Katie McKendrick.
Yeah, I think just adding on to that, putting a row or a box for the Ferns permit number on here is helpful, because if this is going to be a plan that you can refer to day of when you're calling ODF to check in about permission to burn piles, that's just a helpful spot to have that on there.
Yeah, agree with all. And also in Lane County, Lane Regional Air Protection Agency, which they're sort of refining their process right now around non-industrial thinning slash and what they're going to be requiring for that, which is the only place where that overlap with ODF comes into play, and it's rather confusing, to say the least. And that's actually, some of those details are currently being worked out between ODF and LRAPA. So
Got both Katies with their hands up. Yeah.
The other thing, and this may be a can of worms we don't want to get into, and I imagine this is probably in the understory / broadcast burn plan, but any sort of like prescription parameters that we want to see in highlighted or identified in the non-broadcast burn plan, I would think that would be potentially like a liability protection measure on ODF's part, but something to think about.
yeah, and I mean, taking this, by the way, was adopted from a TNC template. And so in that template, it leaves it more or less open to say, you know, that these piles will be lit when the surrounding fuels are too moist to sustain combustion. And if this is for ODF protected land, so ODF wouldn't be granting a permit for this without that being in place, meaning you can't burn piles during fire season without an ODF permit. So once we're out of fire season, that's when it's considered safe to do this, but you still want to put in there what the conditions under which burning is allowed in advance, right? So it's,
this looks very familiar, obviously coming from the TNC side, and these are some of the things as a TNC fire manager that I have started adding to this template. So that's kind of the perspective that I'm bringing, is like, yes, there's a basic, and then there's like, what really do we want to see from our folks on the ground?
right. And so then it's about how do you, when we have prescription parameters for doing broadcast and understory burning, it's about when we can get things to burn in a certain way that we want to, whereas we manipulate the pile conditions generally by covering them to do that. And so then it's about the surroundings not sustaining fire spread and how we determine things won't burn. So when we say prescription parameters, it's basically like saying, when are things not burnable in the surroundings? Because we assume the pile will burn due to being covered. So it's sort of the opposite way that we think about prescription parameters, but yes, that makes a ton of sense. Okay. So the only personnel need that Katie McKendrick.
I just had a couple ideas to share. They take them or leave them. But for the purposes of learning through time, based on ecological weather conditions, how pile burning, how the objectives are met or not met in the context of pile burning, could there be at some point a row for like fuel moisture content or age of fuels in the burn pile, types of wood in the, just, I don't know, for ODF's benefit as this progresses, how could there be some learning associated with these plans? How could data be compiled through the use of these planning tools? Just an idea, take it or leave it. Yeah, the other one would be perhaps at some future time, there's a link to a spot where there can be more narrative description about coming up with objectives, about mop up and preparedness for after you light the pile, kind of thing. I don't know if that's in the certified burn manager the curriculum and associated tools, but just an idea.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's certainly going to be taught to in the learning objectives. But there's the judgment of the certified burn manager based on their training and how they decide some of these things versus the more prescriptive parameters or metrics you might use, things like fuel moisture, for example, which is a tricky one because with pile burning, you are using a heat sink that then can consume things that would not otherwise be consumable. So it's a nuanced thing that's a little trickier, and there's so many different factors that come into play in terms of how big the pile is. You could have dry fuel in the bottom and wet fuel on the top of the covering, and the wet fuel is going to get consumed if the dry fuel underneath is sufficient enough to create that heat sink. So I think a lot of it has to do with the descriptive aspect. And then like you were talking about, making an opportunity to learn from some of that. So I think those are really good suggestions. And again, some of it will come into the play in the learning objectives and the curriculum, and some of it will come into play in the process of getting a permit, I guess, if you will. But that's really about smoke and not about fuel moisture. And so that gets back to pile construction, which the certified burn manager only has so much control over. And that's why pile burning is a lot more tricky than most people acknowledge, I think, because there's multiple layers to it. There's people making the piles, and then there's the people lighting them. And those are often not the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll just add the reality of technologies surrounding ignition and how those are expanding and interacting with the type of fuel and the fuel moisture levels. So yeah, there's a lot of complexity there.
Yeah, agreed.
John.
So I've got several things. I was going to wait till you're all the way through, but it seems like we're kind of in a free for all here. So I'm just going to jump in. One, I really strongly encourage that we keep the plan itself simple. So the stuff that you're talking about, Katie, is really good information, but maybe we want to have an opportunity, a way that people can report back on results and things of that nature from a learning perspective. But the plan itself, I think we want to keep this simple, because if we make it complex, then the likelihood is that people are not going to use it. If we make it simple, maybe we can get to the point where people are actually planning through this process. And we can create something that's an annotated version of this that gives some ideas about how to fill it out effectively. I do think that we need to have in here the NOAP number, the permit number, where those are applicable. It just seems remiss that those aren't here. In the section there around emergency phone numbers and stuff like that, it feels like we're missing the section there to notify neighbors, because I think about the neighbors. To me, that's almost my entire prescription for pile burning is when is the wind conditions right, so I'm not smoking out the neighbors, because if I have them complaining, I'm less likely to be able to continue to do this on a university property. So I think that we should have that neighbor notification in there, like we do on the other plan template. I think somebody already mentioned pile size. To me, that's a really important thing to have in here, maybe one of the most important measurements that we can have. I'm a little bit like, I'm not entirely comfortable saying we're going to stick contingency and safety and medical plan in the same box. I guess we could, but contingency seems very different than medical and safety. So maybe there's a way to split those out, or maybe contingency fits better up there with holding. It seems like it is. It's more resource oriented. Not a hill I want to die on. Smoke management, ODF has really specific smoke management stuff. And it just seems like we want to make that connection to ODF's really specific smoke management stuff. Just make it direct in there, right? So Maybe it's even just check boxes. Have you done the stuff that the smoke management website says you're supposed to do? Check, right? Or what practices are you going to take in addition to that? So maybe we need a little more guidance in that. Feels like to me that if we're putting personnel in here, that yes, we're going to have somebody who's going to be the CBM for this, but more than likely, if I'm writing this plan, I want my workers to be able to implement this plan. And so maybe I want to list in here what I'm thinking in here relative to additional personnel. Not a huge deal, but down under personnel needs, I'd leave a line where we could add those personnel needs in if possible. And then I think where it says equipment needs, my recommendation would be to, rather than have the 3-column kind of table in there, seems like equipment needs for pile burning that's kind of like unique to the burner. Like, what do I like to use, right? So I think it's worth capturing, but I don't feel like we need the 3-column table in there. I think just an open box in there like you have every place else will let me capture what I want to put in there for how I'm going to go about doing this particular burn. So just make it simple. And that gives you a little more space in the template if we want to split something out above.
Yeah, and just to clarify, John, those are just examples in there. Those don't need to be in there.
Yeah, so in addition to removing the examples, I would recommend not even having the 3 columns, just the box. I think that's all we need in this particular kind of plan. So that's my stuff. I'll stop now. Sorry, Tim, I was going way fast. You kept up.
Where I moved to taking comments and writing them down as opposed to live editing anything.
And I just would add that under personnel, I put the only required position there, but that wasn't meant to exclude others. But I see that we didn't really leave room for others, so we need to make sure there's space there to fill that in, like you said.
Okay,
I don't know if Katie has another question, but I've got a question.
I think let's go with Kitty M, and then we'll get to Amanda.
Nope, just forgetful. I'll lower my hand.
So so just 2 additional comments. I would suggest for the under signatures that there's also a box for like printed name, because oftentimes you can't read the signature.
Okay.
So just making sure that there's printed name, and then we might also want to include somewhere on here, company. If they're, if somebody's acting on behalf of a company or they're doing the operation for an employer, that might be good information to have on here as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
And I mean, really, if you think about it, it's just, there's no signature requirements technically, so we could just put names in there.
Yeah,
There's nothing anywhere that says we need people to sign this.
I lean more towards signature because with it being tied to potential liability and approved, but no, printed names and signatures always helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
We have one more hand raised, and I'm going to apologize for I'm unsure of how to pronounce Sani.
Hi, my name is Chani Matizuki, and I just want to clarify, is it okay that I comment even though I'm not on the committee?
Sure.
Okay, thank y'all. I really appreciate it. I just moved here from Louisiana, and I just started a job at ODFW, working with a lot of the biodiversity recovery and assessment after the RG Creek and BG Creek fires. And I am a aspiring fire ecologist, of course, and I was a burn manager in Louisiana. And so when I got here, I was really excited about being a part of this whole, prescribed burning on the West Coast, basically. And so I'm really happy to be here, but I just kind of wanted to comment and add on to what John Punches said. I think having like an additional PDF that's like a partner piece to this might be very beneficial, like explaining kind of how you were going about it earlier, like explaining in each box how like it could be filled out or questions that they should ask themselves when going through it. And so this can remain simple, but then there's a partner piece to it, and that has like a whole PDF with all of that's an exact copy of this, and then also a checklist with things that they should go through, like considering the transport winds for the day and the category day and the relative humidity, and did you contact these 4 people, here are their numbers, did you contact your neighbors, and other things like that.
That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, that's helpful. Okay, so I think we're down, where were we? Well, we've been jumping around a little bit, but smoke management, we've talked about that and increasing or making that more specific. And I think I would just reiterate that all of this for the certified burn manager will come with some training, but if someone's preparing this plan who isn't a certified burn manager, they would need instructions. And that's actually something Tim identified really early on, was like, this will need an instruction companion to this process. So that's been reflected back to us. Appreciate that. Let's see.
Hey, Amanda, one other thing, I really like the comment that John made related to the check boxes for the smoke management and making sure
Yeah.
that it's as easy as possible. And so we might want to think through how we might take that same idea and apply it to other boxes. If there's like very specific information we want somebody to fill out, maybe it's identifying that and then providing an area for them to fill it out. I mean, thinking about making this as easy as possible, we already have somewhat of I'm not going to say large barrier to entry, but there is a barrier to entry to getting the certified burn manager qualification. And making this as clear and concise for what we are looking for, I think is only going to make it more useful. Right. So I don't have any like very specific examples of how we might do that in each of the boxes, but
Have the critical stuff just front and center, critical needs, and then the narrative of the add-ons. I was thinking like the certified burn manager ID number, some things like that. That are the nuts and bolts.
Right. Yeah. So anyways, I think we have like all the pieces correct on here. It's just how we orient them and kind of have them kind of organized in the document to make it as easy as possible.
Absolutely.
And clear, right, for what we're actually asking.
Katie.
I think one way to go about that is to have it kind of pulled out as, call it what you want, like a pre-burn checklist. So you have a pre-burn checklist that has the planning stages. So like you have your smoke permit, you've contacted so-and-so, your resources are on site, your water sources are whatever you want to do. Have that just pulled out as a separate section, maybe near the end or at the beginning, and then the descriptive stuff can be in this written plan. Just as one option, like checklist of the easiest things, and then the descriptive stuff sits here.
Right, and that could be using the checklist that goes with the understory broadcast burn plan in a modified form.
I know the Nature Conservancy, and I'd be happy to share this, has one specific to non-broadcast burning that cuts out some of the stuff from the broadcast burn plan that some of it could be applicable.
Well, yeah, it'd be good to see that.
Ready to jump from one to the next?
Yeah, I think so. Anything else? This is really good. Lots of good feedback. Appreciate it. And we'll now jump into the broadcast understory burn plan template, some of which we may see as useful to move over to the pile burn plan template. So you'll see a lot of the top is the same, and that's pulled from this and put over into the pile burn plan template. So maybe we'll just move down to registration, smoke clearance, and permits, since that's already been given us feedback to move over to the other. But is this sufficient? Is this what we want, or does this need to be more? I think it's important to note that there's the caveat of if required, because depending on the type of burning, it may or may not require a NOAP or a PDM or a smoke permit. And so this is part of what we'll be covering under the learning objectives for the training. And the more that I dig into it, the more confusing it gets to some extent because of overlapping jurisdictions, especially in Lane County. I think once, and something to note is that currently, as it's written in rule, this only covers classified forest land within ODF protection. The Certified Burn Manager program does. And so technically, if it's not classified forest land, it's not covered. Now, we'll see whether or not one of the bills that is currently proposed, which we'll talk about at the end, if it gets passed, then it will change that to cover areas that are not classified as forest land. That was more or less of an oversight. But that's where it gets confusing. Is if it's a forestry activity and it's in classified forest land, it's harvest generated / that's a very straightforward, but once it's outside of that, that's where it gets tricky. I'm not going to get too much into the details on that because it would probably open up a can of worms for discussion. But in order to get through the burn plan, we'll move on. So here's where we have notifications that are in a different format, which maybe we want to use this approach instead of the one that's in the pile burn plan template, because instead of saying, emergency and burn activity, we just have required contacts, and that covers all. And then we have nearby landowners and neighbors. Although I would say that nearby landowners and neighbors are technically required contacts according to the rules as written. So maybe we just put required contacts as a heading overall, and then we clarify that one group is nearby landowners and neighbors, and the other group is going to be regulatory authorities, emergency, fire response, permitting, etc. Do we want to do that? I see heads nodding. Maybe we'll put a comment in there to that end. So now the next area would be burn unit description. And we decided on, very general / brush, grass, and/or timber, fuel loading in tons per acre, and then the size of the unit. Open up for discussion if folks think that needs to be different. This is not to say that one of those 4 categories is the simple fuel model that's used for creating a prescription, right? Because that gets much more detailed than that. That's just for general purposes in terms of, and one thing I'd encourage you all to think about is what's it like for someone working at the district level in ODF to be receiving this, because that's one of the reasons it's organized the way it is. So the first page has the things they're really wanting, or the first few pages has the stuff that they're wanting to see right away. And so some of it's that, what kind of fuel is going to be burned. Is there a comment in the chat?
Yep.
That we need to...
Katie McKendrick, perhaps consider adding something like permit expiration date to the NOAP smoke permit section so you can track that info here. We can definitely do that.
Okay. Now we have permit or the fuels and vegetation description inside and outside the unit. Of course, that's important because you're looking at what you're burning versus what you're hoping not to burn. And they may be different and they may be the same, depending on your situation. We have preparation. And so one thing you'll notice that a lot of this burn plan has more specifics within the boxes of what needs to be addressed. So in this case, we have the description of primary control lines and how they were prepared for use, and then the location and confirmation of access to primary water sources. And that doesn't mean it has to be a pond on site. That can be a water tender that's going to be ordered up, and then that's going to link back to your equipment, which is right below. Seems pretty, hopefully that's pretty straightforward, and that gives some direction. We also, when we created this, had a lot more examples in here, and it seemed to be more confusing, almost like what we just went through with looking at the pile burn plan template, is not to be too prescriptive and saying, oh, you have to use a drift torch. It's leaving it more open, and then leaving it to training and links for more information. So the only position that we have here that is not negotiable is the certified burn manager. So we have that under personnel, and that's always going to be there for this, as long as it's being used. I mean, if folks want to use this burn plan for non-certified burn manager burns, they can. They'll just need to change that for their own purposes. And we have minimum resources and equipment, and we specified the burn phase, whether that was during ignition or patrol and mop up. I think that's important because you know, you are going to need certain resources there when you're actually burning, and others are going to be there to patrol. And patrol may not be a whole lot. It could be a pickup truck with, you know, 150-gallon tank and a pump in the back. Maybe it won't be any water supply, and it's just someone out there checking 3 weeks later to see whether they need to call a resource to come in. So that's open-ended, number needed, equipment type, etc. Next, under communications, we made it open-ended as far as radio, cellular, or other forms of communications, because we don't want folks to feel as though they have to have Bendix King radios that have tactical and receiving frequencies set up for them. But we included those fields so that those could be filled in. Under contingency and wildfire declaration, we have when to activate contingency. And this now it reads more. We were having a hard time with this one, just so you guys know, in terms of wording, because we're trying to get away from the use of the word trigger points, because that is referring to firearms, and that's triggering for people. So we're trying, and that was some feedback from one of the people that we were working with in our group. So we were using points of activation, but now I'm like, wait, when to activate contingency points of activation? There's activate twice there, and that reads a little awkward. So we could use some help with trying to come up with ways to talk about points of activation that are not referring to triggering and wordsmithing. We have location and condition of secondary control lines and backup water sources. You know, I think that's based on that primary and secondary, you know, that kind of approach to having different plans, right? You've got your primary plan how you think things should go and you hope they go, and then you know, how things are going to go thereafter, and hopefully not, but that backup secondary is identified there. And then the criteria and procedure for wildfire declaration. You know, ODF could declare a wildfire at any point with this, but I think that making sure that's identified in advance as to when things are considered out of control.
We have a recommendation for contingency action points.
Oh yeah.
And then when to activate contingency and actions taken in response.
Mm-hmm. So. Okay, that's a good one. We can throw that in there.
Hey, Amanda,
Yeah.
for the second point, the location and condition of secondary control lines and backup water sources, you have the next box down where it identifies location. Are we being duplicative there? And could that be something that people identify on a map of the unit? Or do you want them to actually describe?
It could say C, you could say C map if you want. It could, I mean, a map doesn't necessarily tell you what the condition is, but it could tell you the location.
More specifically,
and
I guess.
Backup water could be, it's, you know, at the fire station down the road that's not on your map. So there's so many different alternatives for what those could be, that just a mention of what they are and what they mean is kind of what we're looking for there. Because the contingency resource response time and location, that may be your backup water source, or it might be, you know, hey, if you're having trouble getting water out of this pond, there's another one down the road. And that's not necessarily like a contingency resource in the same thing, because you don't have a response time for it, and you have to go to it.
John.
Is for everybody's edification. One of the things that we've been talking about as we crafted this and went through many, many rounds of review on this was that we know that you can't put enough information in these boxes to tell everyone what to do every time. So this really, we need to create a linked version of this that somebody can use as a guide that leads them to, here's examples, here's what we're trying to get at in this box. So there's a way efficiently to have people interpret what this means without trying to put 10 million examples in here that then just become confusing.
Yep, exactly. And I think that's really important so that it's a clean document people can use, but then they can go to see examples that will help them come up with this. But then again, it kind of gets back to people will be trained in how to do this.
Yeah, and I don't know, is there anybody else with their hand up? I don't want to talk over somebody.
No.
So one other thing, just so that I am clear, the intent of the plan, right? So the plan, either or, right, is going to be submitted to ODF for the purposes of ODF approved. Like, remind me what the purpose of a plan is, other than just that obviously it's good practice to create a burn plan when you're going to go burn.
ODF will not approve the plan, but ODF wants the plan to be submitted so that we have something that's documented that tells us what's going on.
Yep.
And it helps with our decision space about whether to issue a permit. So it's teaching to thinking through all these things before you go burn and having that documented. But this isn't something that's this needs to happen, but how it happens is pretty wide in terms of the range.
Yeah, and just thinking through that as far as what and how we say what's required in the plan, remembering what the purpose of the plan is, right? I think is important. Like was mentioned, it's not that it's gonna say everything for everyone.
No.
But again, just remembering what it's for, like legally what it's for, and then what it's for practically, right?
Yeah. So and there's considerations for what should be in a burn plan in the smoke management rules. So we actually have them in a different place currently.
Yeah.
So we're working through getting some alignment there, but this is kind of the first step of having something in place that's a little more structured, and ODF will be we review it to make sure that everything looks good and is reasonable.
Yeah, so as just a quick follow-up, I know John's got his hand up now again. This plan or this template could be used to submit for somebody to submit for their smoke management permit, and then it would also be required now. This is a question. It would also be required now to be able to get your burn permit through burns.
So the only
I just don't know what the law says.
The only requirement now is that to be a certified burn manager, you must have a burn plan to have for the liability portions.
Okay.
So that's the new requirement. If you want to operate as a certified burn manager, you must operate under a burn plan.
Yeah,
but it doesn't. This is the tricky thing, is that ODF does not quote unquote approve it. There's nothing in there that says it approves it, but you have to have a plan that you're following,
just like a notification.
Yeah,
of course,
exactly.
Right.
Yep. Thank you.
Hey, John, you're up.
So I'm gonna just add on to this, Amanda, because I think this is an important question. So by becoming a CBM, the state has said that CBMs are going to be held to a different standard of what's identified as negligence if we have an escape, right? And so part of that requirement is that there be a burn plan. Well, if there's going to be a burn plan, there's got to be a burn plan that meets some sort of reasonable minimal requirements. And so this is setting that standard. And so while it's not required by ODF that they sign off on this, I think that where this really comes into play is this becomes the document that is going to go to court with us if we have a legal action taken against us. And so we want to make sure that we have a credible, well-designed plan that's going to support that. Because if we have something that's just makeshift, it's probably not going to represent us well if we go into a court of law and people compare us to other standards for these types of plans. So that was the intent here, was to have something that's not as complex as what a federal burn plan would require, because we don't have to comply with NEPA and all those other things, but we do have to have something that is consistent with the best practices for how burn plans are developed.
And I think just to add to that, this is not the only burn plan we will accept. We are providing a template to be used, that if somebody wants to come up with their own burn plan, they can. They just have to meet the minimum requirements. So this is what we've created to make sure that we have everything there in one place that people can use, and it sets a standard. But there's other templates floating around out there.
And so, you know, recognizing that somebody else could have a different burn plan, and we're saying, okay, well, there's minimum requirements, and those are set in statute right now. I can't remember.
We
If there's
actually,
minimum requirements, then where are those? And should we be reviewing those in tandem with the template that ODF is putting together?
I'm thinking in terms of when a district is giving permission inside fire season to burn in certain categories, but I don't think that we actually, there was a point in time where we were looking at putting those in, and I don't think that we did. And then it came back to ODF gets to decide what the burn plan template looks like.
Because we need to identify those if somebody else is going to be utilizing it, you know, unless we say you shall.
The rules say the plan shall be prepared in a format approved by the forester.
So then, so would we, okay.
So
Just to be clear though, like a federal burn plan template is above and beyond this. So there's basically anything that includes what's in here will be fine, and more than that, but it can't include less than this.
Okay. So maybe that should be something included in whatever supplementary document that identifies how to fill this form out. You know, just some introductory language that says, you know, as a certified burn manager, whatever, held to a higher standard, yada yada, liability. You know, you can utilize this template or another one that meets the same minimum requirements as identified in this template, or something like that.
Sure.
So, I just think that helps as we continue to work through this, thinking through. I think, John, I appreciate identifying. You're right. This would follow to court, and keeping that on our mind as we move through these things, I think, is really important.
Great discussion.
Okay. All right, let's see. Continuing on through the document. This was another one where we used a term that was kind of outside the box. And this came, so normally what you see in its federal template will be values at risk was one thing, and then constraints. And we tried to switch that to sideboards. We can certainly make it more restrictive or use more intense language there. But what we're trying to get at is that there's a lot of times when these burn plans will have very strict, what they call constraints with regards to silviculture, or, you know, you can't burn this up. And understandable, yes, you're trying not to have that happen. But if you have more than like 2% mortality of your trees from, you know, certain size classes, we are trying to shift it away from that being something that could then end up in court and be a problem. And so making it more guidance as opposed to strict, but we can make it stricter too if folks think that needs to be. But really, what this is about is what do you value both inside and outside the unit, and what are the sideboards on maintaining those values?
I have a suggestion on language. I understand why one would not want to use constraints. But maybe saying values at risk and prescriptive sideboards or something like that, that ties back into a silvicultural prescription, or, you know, kind of the ecological constraints there. For, you know, that might be a little bit more clear than just saying sideboards.
So to consider mitigating measures instead of.
Oh, that's a good one too.
Oh, yeah.
That's good. Okay. Yeah, that in there.
Both of those are good.
Okay. Now, I understand that we've got, so there's two sides to smoke management. There's the permitting side, and then there's how you identify potential issues and what you're going to mitigate with those, right? And so, I mean, this is to get at the point that even if you can burn and you don't need a permit, you should still be identifying receptors or class 1 air sheds, distance and direction, and what you're going to do to avoid those impacts. I mean, technically, for example, you can go and smoke out a road, and it's like your permit's not going to tell you whether you can do that. But you should be careful not to do that, or get some signage in place, or do something to mitigate those impacts. And so that's why we are using the term smoke sensitive receptor as opposed to SSRA, which is a designation within the Oregon Smoke Management Plan. Class 1 airsheds, you know, federally designated areas such as a wilderness area where visibility standards are to be upheld in a certain manner and or improved over time. And so putting more smoke into those areas is something you want to avoid. And distance and direction kind of helps you plan out what you're going to need to do there. And then the smoke management forecast day before and day of burn is included there. Let's see, we've got test fire and ignitions, pretty basic, where you're going to start your test fire, and then what kind of equipment, methods, and sequences you're going to use for ignitions. Under holding and containment, which, by the way, this is, you know, this is slightly different language, and we split out holding, mop up, and patrol here differently than in our pile burn plan. And to be specific on why, that's because when you're burning piles, you're relying on the surrounding fuel moisture and environmental conditions to be holding for you. Whereas in this case, you need to have an active plan in place for containment while you're burning. And so this is about where the critical holding points are, how you're going to mitigate them, what your line specifications are, and the rationale behind that for containment. That has to do with fuel breaks and whether you're using a mow line or you're actually putting in a hand line or you're using a road. And then explaining why and how that's going to go. And then this, you know, some of this stuff we've changed based on feedback from within ODF. So mop up, patrol, and notification of declaring burn out. The mop up standards, and then frequency and duration of patrol. And that should be based on the conditions. And then describing the criteria and notifications for declaring the burn out, which is really important for closing the book on this from the standpoint of ODF needing to be concerned about this turning into something they have to deal with later. And really, this applies to pile burning as well. So maybe this is something that needs to be moved over to that section too. But yeah, this is not something that, you know, you see in the federal template, but this, I think, is a good way of packaging these three things, because they all go together. One leads to the next, really. You should be starting some kind of mop up in theory, unless it's just a grass burn, you know, not too long after ignition, but not too deep or too soon, because the smoldering is doing a lot of work. And so that's why being clear about what you want and how frequently is so important. And then moving into safety and medical and emergency. This is just basic, where the nearest hospital is, the safety issues and mitigation measures. And then we use the term, thanks to John bringing this to the group, rally point, which is actually a good thing to delineate from staging area, you know, or something else. I mean, or briefing point. This is where we will take somebody who needs to be evacuated, and maybe we can clarify that more in here. And then resource management goals and prescribed fire objectives. Now, I know some folks are wondering why we waited till this far into the document to put these things. Well, it's because what feedback from ODF folks who are going to be reviewing these and using these as guides for tracking all this work. They do care about these things, but they really wanted to see that other stuff first. So we reorganized it all to that end based on a lot of that feedback internally. But this is where you talk about what you're trying to achieve with your burn. And it's important to describe differently resource management goals from prescribed fire objectives, because really the prescribed fire objectives are going to meet the resource management goals, but you need to talk about what those goals are to begin with, so that then you can create prescribed fire objectives that will meet those resource management goals.
Amanda,
Yeah.
it seems like that should be married up with the values at risk, because all of that has to do with kind of what the prescription is, and it seems like to me as a forester, all of those go together.
It does when they're inside the unit, but not outside the unit. Right? Because if you're just trying to like keep fire out of certain things that are values at risk and they're not in the unit, then it's not really a part of your resource management goal. But we could split inside and outside, and we could just make values at risk outside the unit and then talk about the values at risk inside the unit under resource management goals. I could see that.
Yeah, I guess as a forester, I think on a landscape.
Yeah.
And so it's not just what's happening in the unit, it's how that unit fits into the broader landscape. So that's why my mind goes, doesn't really stop at the edge of the unit. Well, it's like describing it in a bit larger context.
It specifically values at risk of the fire harming them that you don't want them to harm, right? So it's like, so I think when that's the case, it's sort of like we can't burn up this thing over here, or in a maybe more of an interfaith context versus like out in the woods. But yeah, I think we can work on that, because I definitely see your point.
I just feel like for fire ecology, it's sort of, to me, it all goes together. And because right now it's sort of bifurcated between like, I do fire and that's all I do, and those are just other values and I don't really give a crap about those, versus like we really should, as forestry professionals, be thinking about the larger context.
Agreed.
Incorporating all of that. But maybe I'm just sensitive.
That's fine. No, I definitely see what you're saying. I think there's a way to integrate your feedback there.
John.
So again, for edification, so there is a logic to how this is kind of laid out. And remember that part of the reason that things are organized as they are is there's a segment of this. It's like, what's the stuff that ODF people really need to review? Because they're not going to impose on me my management goals, right? But they are going to say, if there's a potential that your prescribed fire will escape and burn up your neighbor's house, we want to know that you've considered that, because that becomes something that if that fire escapes, that's an ODF issue, right? And so there's a reason there that those values at risk things were kind of placed where they were. Values at risk that are inside the unit, that are ecological in nature or even non-ecological in nature, those are going to go in my description of my management goals and my prescribed fire objectives. They're going to be captured in those areas when I write this kind of a plan, because like you're thinking there, I'm very much focused on what the ecological effects of the fire are. But I wouldn't probably describe those in that stuff that's more related to how I keep the fire within its boundaries, right? So when I think about prescribed fire plans, my brain always operates in two places, and I actually plan in two phases, right? So there's the piece that I'm thinking about, how do I accomplish my ecological objectives within the burn? And then there's the other piece that's, how do I keep it within that intended boundary, and what are my plans if it gets out of that boundary? So there's the piece that's the how do I accomplish my burn, and there's a piece that how do I contain my burn, right? And just the kind of way that this turned out, because of the need for ODF to have that stuff up front, the stuff that is more heavily weighted towards containment is the first stuff that appears in this particular plan template, and the stuff that's more heavily associated with how do I accomplish my ecological objectives is the second half. So that was the logic for where stuff was put. And I guess we could be maybe a little more descriptive in that thing about the resource or the values at risk, that those are really intended to more capture the stuff that's outside the unit. But that's the underlying intent of this particular template.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. That is just kind of bifurcating the two for legal reasons. But yeah, I guess for the ecological pieces, like say, you're doing an understory burn. I mean, that's what this is, right? Or it could be. and you've got standing timber, that's a value at risk, and you only want to have so much torching, or you don't want to have any torching or whatever, you know, that could be up above as a value at risk, but, you know, or prescriptive sideboard or whatever we want to call, but it would also be in either one of these sections. So maybe just clarifying that.
I think you can absolutely split them out and have the values at risk outside up above and the values at risk inside under resource management goals, and there's no reason you can't do that.
Yeah.
Katie had her hand up and took it down.
Okay.
So,
I was just going to mention it's quite possible that you have a value at risk inside your unit that's non-ecological, right? So you could have like a structure or something. So just making sure you don't lose track of that as well.
So, with looking at the time and the agenda and the folks who may have joined to provide public comment today, they've been waiting 10 minutes already. So I want to take a pause, and for any folks who want to provide comment to the committee or on the subject matter, feel free to raise your hand in the chat or turn on your camera. I want to do that call now, and then afterwards we'll hop back into the reviewing the rest of the plan and probably have a truncated updates section at the end of the agenda here. Okay, seeing no hands raised and doing a count of folks in, so we'll hop back in. Just want to make sure we got that on the record. So, okay. Sure.
All right, so the resource management goals are going to be things like, you know, maintain greater than 90% of timber 24 inches and above, or something like that. And then the prescribed fire objectives are going to be, you know, reduce fine fuels by 80%, and reduce 10-hour fuels by 40%, that kind of thing for hazard reduction. Or, you know, this is where it gets, these can be kind of tricky to parse out. You can have things that are about ecological resource management that can easily get over into prescribed fire, but really it's about what are you going to try to get the fire to do for you that meets your resource management objectives. So that's burning this much shrub, burning this much 10-hour fuel, that sort of thing. And then getting down into the environmental parameters and fire behavior. We tried to keep this, and there's fields there's fields that are open, obviously, on the fire behavior side. We were really trying to limit it to things that are actual useful metrics. And if you go look at some of these burn plans, they have some stuff that I don't even know how they would measure in BTUs and things like that, where it's like, why do you have that in there? And so we really tried to keep things out that aren't going to get measured, like fire line intensity. Why is that? That's in burn plans all the time. It's just because the Behave program, which models fire behavior, spits that out for us. And so we put it in there. But if we're not actually evaluating that, then it seems silly to put it in there. On the environmental prescription side, we have forecasted and observed on purpose and it's a difference between 20-foot and eye level, because when you get a National Weather Service forecast, they give you 20-foot winds. But when you're measuring on site, they're eye level. And there is a reduction factor from the 20-foot to the eye level. We did not use mid-flame for a reason. If anybody who knows me from burn plan reviews, etc., knows I have a real problem with mid-flame wind speed, because it's not usually accurately represented in burn plans. It's highly reduced from the 20-foot. And most of the time people put 20-foot winds in the mid-flame. And actually that means you can burn with a 40-mile-an-hour wind, which most of us aren't doing. And so I didn't use any mid-flame, and I argued for that one. And then transport wind direction, which relates back to smoke. And that's important to put in there, because you want to know where your wind's going to be carrying your smoke. And then find dead fuel moisture, because that's the only thing that can be measured with a calculation, which we will teach. And otherwise, you got to have instruments to measure 10-hour and above. And we don't want to be requiring that, but it's optional. So if folks want to, and we added more fields down there. So if somebody wants to put in 10-hour fields and they want to measure that, or they want to cut open logs and measure inside the hundreds and thousands, they can do that too. And then we put in, and to just be clear, what we're intending to do is provide pre-identified prescriptions people can grab from. So this is kind of our big project to do now, which is partly tying into a project that John Bailey and Andrew Owen, who's the state forester with NRCS, and John Punches here are working on with a graduate student to create these pre-identified prescriptions that people can just grab based on some common scenarios. But those are mostly just for Northeast Oregon. So we'll be trying to expand upon that work so that nobody has to go and try and model fire behavior, because that's not something that we think people should be trying to do. From having taught that stuff for many years, people who are federal burn bosses struggle with modeling fire behavior using those programs. So that's just not something we're trying to promote. We're trying to,
and on the industrial side, I don't know how much that's happening for,
I'm sure not. I mean,
you know,
yeah.
and I'd have to ask some of my members, and some other folks may know better than me that work with them.
Well, and even based on the NWCG template and the interagency prescribed fire planning and operations guide, it doesn't require modeling. You can have experience-based, observationally based prescription development. And if you look at most prescriptions, they don't vary that much based on the different models. There's still going to be an upper level temperature threshold and wind threshold. And that's what ODF cares about. Is it too windy? Is it too hot and dry to burn? There's 3 metrics we care about: relative humidity, wind speed, and temperature. And those are going to be there's going to be an upper threshold to that. And on the lower end, you're going to get to a point where it just won't burn. And so getting ourselves wrapped around the axle of prescriptions, it's going to be more influenced by things like live fuel moisture and whether you're going to get brushed burn. And that, you can manipulate with mastication to make it a dead fuel bed that then you can evaluate more easily. So we're trying to simplify this because it gets overly complex very quickly. I'll get off my soapbox on that one, but we're trying to make this accessible and easy. So down to weather monitoring and methods, we got most representative remote automated weather station, a RAWS, or other reliable weather stations, because not all weather stations are National Weather Service RAWS stations. And then the method of collection of weather data and the frequency before, during, and after ignition. And then this is monitoring and methods for post-burn fuels and vegetation. And this is just to talk about how you're going to look at what you did and how well it worked out for you for fire effects. Yeah. So yeah. So that is, there's a place for vicinity and burn unit maps. That's an attachment. And then we took the TNC pre-burn go, no go, crew briefing, test fire, and post-burn checklist, and we modified it. Made a number of changes to it, just what read differently for the most part, nothing huge. And it sounds like we'll get their non-broadcast pile burn version to see if we want to plug that into our pile burn template, which is great. And then the signature at the bottom of that to make sure, and this is really that checklist to make sure you're doing all the stuff that the burn plan says you're supposed to do. So it's helpful. So that's that. Anything else for the template review?
I might have missed this. Are maps a required attachment?
Yep, they're in there. You got to have a map. Yeah, we need to see what the units looks like. I would say at minimum a unit map, but we put vicinity and burn unit maps for add additional orientation and travel. Okay, well, we've got just 5 minutes left, and this is just for quick updates before we adjourn. On the curriculum side, working on that, and John and Heather have really educated me on some of the terminology I use. I might have put in here learning objectives and assessment, which is what I've replaced the term curriculum with, because that's really what we're creating is learning objectives and an assessment that then is used to create a full curriculum, which includes content. So that process is ongoing, and I would like to say by the next meeting, we will have that kind of information for you to review next. We haven't scheduled our next meeting yet, so I guess we'll see with that, but my guess is we'll be scheduling our next meeting based on that information being available. Did you want me to update on legislative stuff, or do you want to do that, Tim?
I can tackle that one.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's two bills currently in session, House Bills 2985 and 2986. Those are been passed out of committee before the chamber deadline and are sitting over at Ways and Means. One of them pertains directly to this program, as it does modify ORS 526360 subsection, I think it's 6 now, which is where the CBM Certified Burn Manager program is residing, and it closes some of the gaps in the requiring that the program or that the burn manager only burn on forest land, modifying the language so it changes from on forest land to within an ODF protection district, and makes a little clarity that you can tell where a district boundary is from a map, but you can't see forest land if you're standing in it, where that boundary is. So that should help not only this program, but also ODF staff in general as we engage in prescribed fire. So, but that's that one's currently over in Ways and Means. It's also that is language is attached to the I believe it's 85, which is the liability prescribed fire liability fund. So it's part of that bill. So waiting until probably after the March or May 17th chamber revenue forecast to see what the fate is for those two particular pieces of legislation.
All right. Well,
let me go through a summary of what I got.
Yeah, sure. That sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks.
So for next steps here, I've got a lot of feedback on the charter. So as mentioned, we'll get that integrated in and over to committee members for their feedback after the wordsmithing from everything for today, and we'll add that to the agenda for the next meeting. We'll make sure that get all those outlines in there. I got John's question regarding the decision space in that kind of environment, so we'll get some research on that and get that clarified. And then also with the I believe the burn plants will probably be on the next agenda as well, with some of the takeaways from today and some of the transfers of that. So to be seeing that work in progress.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, I thought we might end early today, but we came right up to the end of our time scheduled here. Thanks to all the thoughtful input and feedback and reflections from this group. I knew this would be an active one, and it turned out to be the case. So thanks for everybody's presence and feedback. It really helps us a ton, and that's the whole point of this committee, is to make sure that what we're doing makes sense and is changed according to what you guys think and see. So I appreciate your time and energy today. I guess we'll adjourn.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.